All right, so in this lesson, we're going to be learning about random number generators. Now, Python has a built-in random number generator, much like many programming languages do. And I'm actually at the documentation page here because I wanted to show you a couple things before we dive in and play around with these a little bit. First of all, look at the title. Generates pseudo-random numbers. So what that basically means is that we use an algorithm to make it spit out numbers that look random, but in all reality, they are not truly random. If it's truly random choice, like when we have random choice, then we can pick any number we want to. But in this case, it's actually an algorithm that predicts or pops out numbers for us. Okay, and so it's pseudo random, meaning that there is something controlling it, and we can actually see a little later on. We can actually make it so that it gives us the same value every time, even though it's supposed to be random. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out, and we're going to look at. They have some different things. We're going to look at seed. We're also going to look at functions for integers and functions for sequences because we've actually played around with both of these in previous lessons. So we're going to see how we can pull random values and random items from things like lists. So let's jump into Python and take a look at this. Now, the documentation is linked in the lesson. I strongly encourage you to go through and read some of that. There's actually some really neat things that you can do with random. So let's just start out by importing random. This is a package that's pre-installed with Python, but you do still need to import it. And what we're going to do is we're going to say print, and then we're going to say random.random. That seems kind of odd, but it's just calling the random function from the random class. Now, again, we have to put random here because we didn't say from random import random. We just said import the whole thing because we're actually going to use a bunch of them. So we have to specify that we're using the random class or random library and that we're calling the random function. So when I run this, we see that I get this 0.89 long decimal value. This is the way that most random functions typically work in just about any programming language. They generate a value between 0 and 1, and then a lot of times, if you're doing things like Java programming, what you might do is multiply that to get a scaled range and those kind of things. In this case, Python actually has some really nice built-in functions that does that for us, but the heart of every random function is that it generates a number between 0 and 1, and then we manipulate that number to get integers or indices or those kinds of things. So if I run it again, we'll see that I get a different value. If I run it again, we'll see that I get a different value. So that's how the random function works, right? So this isn't terribly useful for us. We don't use decimal values a whole lot in controlling the drone. A lot of times what we want is actually values that are integer values. And we've actually seen this very briefly in a previous lesson, and it's called randint. And we get an A and a B, which are just our starting and stopping values. So in this case, let's say I want a random integer between 1 and 10. So 1 comma 10, those are our parameters that we're inputting. And if I hit run here, now that decimal becomes an integer. Well, how do they do that? Well, in the background, they're taking that value, multiplying it by our range, and then scaling it by rounding it up or down to a number, and that's how we get that 1 to 10. So there's a little bit of math going on in the background, but Python takes care of that for us. So 1 to 10, 1 being the starting value, 10 being the stopping value, and you'll see if I keep running it, I get a lot of different values, right? So that is how I use randint. Now, there's another really neat one that we're going to use later on. So let's call this pets. It's going to be a list. So pets equals, and we're going to do cat, dog, bird, fish. Now, if you remember from the list lesson, these are indexed 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? So we have a list of 4 items in length. And what we want to do is we just want to randomly pick one of the items from that list. The way that we do that is we do print, and I'm just printing to print the values. You could just call this. Obviously, you wouldn't see what it is, but I'm going to print, and we're going to say random.choice, and we're going to pass in pets because choice takes in a list or any other type of sequence, right? Now I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get rid of this guy for a second, and we're going to run it, and we're going to see what happens. All right, so the first time we got cat, the very first index. If I run it again, I got dog, bird, and now I went back to cat. So you might have been thinking, well, it's just going in order, but it actually technically is random, and sometimes you will see patterns occur. So cat, dog, cat, cat, Not getting fish yet. Let's see if we get fish. We'll keep going and keep going. You'll see sometimes it'll repeat. So again, it behaves randomly. Still not getting fish yet. Still not getting fish yet. Okay, so there it is. Finally, we got fish. So it will eventually hit all those values, but again, it's designed to look and act random. Okay, so far we've learned the random function itself just gives us a decimal value between 0 and 1. We've learned randint, which gives us a integer in the range that we specify. And we've also learned choice, which selects from a list a random item in that list. So now that we have a good understanding of how those work, we're going to move on to the lesson. We're going to figure out how to actually implement those in some programs.